Perfect.
4-4 Supreme Court.
Good evening, and welcome to WHC TV's Election Night Live special. My name is Deb Polun, and I'll be your host this evening. And I'm joined here in the studio by our analysts, Chris Williams and Scott Slifka. Thanks
Hello.
for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
So the polls have been closed for about a half an hour. And before we get to talking about the issues of the elections cycle this year, we will go to a video that was put together by the Be the Media teams. They went out to the polls in West Hartford today and talked to some voters. Let's see what they had to find out.
I think it's incredibly important to vote. It's our biggest civic duty.
I think this is such an important election.
That's our civic responsibility, and the decisions that we make obviously dictate what happens in our country.
I think it's very important to vote, especially for me and the kids, because so many people fought in order to give people like us, African Americans and women the right to vote. So I think it's absolutely our civic duty, and I think it's our job. And so that's why I bring my children with me to every single election to make sure they know to exercise their vote.
It may seem like your vote doesn't count in the grand scheme of things, but being part of the process and considering all the candidates, it definitely gets you more involved. I always seem to think that presidential elections is a good way to get into, participating more, knowing more about your local candidates, and really getting to know the laws of your district and so forth.
I think it's really important to vote because the rights of a lot of people are in jeopardy in this election. So if you don't vote, you're really not helping a lot of people who need your help.
Never missed a presidential election, never missed a local election. Vote every year, every time.
Why are you here today?
Because I would vote against Slifka.
Okay.
And I got my sticker. Did you get your stickers?
It's right here.
My daughter took mine.
Oh, well, you need to go back and get another one, but don't vote again. So, there's been a lot of attention on the national race. Obviously, the presidential election has taken up a lot of people's attention, but we have some very interesting races here in Connecticut and here specifically in West Hartford. So let's talk a little bit about the races that we have for state senate and for state representative. Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about the 5th Senate race with Beth Bye and Mark Merritt?
Well, I think you don't have to break it down to the individual race so much as you can apply it to all the legislative races. I think the theme has been the same here, where the Republican Party has been running to say the finances of the state are a mess and we need to clean everybody out. In terms of the 5th District, that Beth has been the chair of the Appropriations Committee, so I think there is an attempt to make her sort of the face of any of the fiscal challenges the state has had. The challenge that I think the Republicans have faced are twofold. One is you're in a presidential year up against a significant Democratic registration advantage, certainly in West Hartford, but within the 5th District as a whole. But also that in West Hartford, these are people they know. These are people that, although they might not be satisfied with how the state is going, they think Beth is fantastic. They've known Beth for years. She was a great service on the school board when she served in the House, and now several years in the Senate. And that's a very hard tide to overcome, is because you're going to argue this person I think has done a good job, who I also know personally, is someone that I need to throw out, and that's awfully tough to do.
What would you say about that, Chris? Mark Merritt, newcomer to politics here in West Hartford. I'm sure you've spoken with him. How do you feel the race has gone for him? Has it been a battle upstream, like Scott's mentioned? Many people in West Hartford know Beth Bye. The district does have 3 other towns in it. How's it been going for him?
Absolutely, and I agree generally with Mayor Slifka. It's hard to call you anything else.
You don't have to.
I don't know. But I agree with his general analysis. I think the thought process with respect to Mark and all the other candidates for the legislature was to say, look, objectively, the financial situation in the state of Connecticut is poor. And the Democratic Party has been in control of the legislature for many years, and it's just time for a change. And I think Mark's attitude with respect to the 5th Senate campaign was to recognize that Senator Bye is generally well-liked within her community, and she's known in the community. So I think he veered from any sort of personal attacks or anything of that nature, and tried to focus on what he offered. And what he offered was a financial background. And what he said is, look, we have financial issues, given my background. Perhaps I'm the person for the job. And he took his case to the people. And to your point, yes, it is an uphill battle, as I think any legislative run in West Hartford at this point is.
So the other races that we have are the 18th district and the 19th district. The 20th, Representative Joe Varengia is running unopposed for re-election. But let's talk about the 19th, which is an open seat. Currently, Representative Brian Becker represents that district. And we have two excellent candidates, I think, both very smart, very committed to public service in Derek Slapp and Chris Barnes. So do you want to talk a little bit about Chris Barnes and what he might bring to the 19th district if he wins that seat?
Absolutely. Chris Barnes is a very good friend of mine in addition to serving on the town council with me. He is the sort of public servant that actually does what he says he's going to do in terms of really reviewing every issue that comes before the town council and tries to do the right thing, really regardless of whether or not it's partisan. And I think that he has a mentality of doing what's right. And I serve next to him, and you'll be shocked at the amount of notes he takes with respect to the smallest of issues, because he cares, he wants to do the right thing. And with respect to what he offers at the General Assembly level, I think that what is needed is more balance at the legislature. We've had one-party rule there for many years. I think Chris would be a good counterbalance to the one-party rule. He'd be someone with new ideas, and he's talked about those throughout his campaign on the 19th. I think the 19th is one of the more competitive races in the General Assembly this year, and so I think he has a very good shot this evening.
And what about Derek Slapp? What can you say about Derek? I know he worked at the Capitol for a while.
He did. Well, he's worked in very senior position in the Capitol for Don Williams, who was the Senate President. He's also somebody that you tend to forget. Derek, well before he got into politics, was a television reporter, so somebody who was known publicly before entering politics formally. He's also been just a guy who's volunteered in town. He's known as a good dad, family guy in town. And I think he was a great pickup for us when Brian decided to retire. Brian did great service to the town in his role, but I think we couldn't have found a better candidate than Derek. And if you'll let me maybe try to give you some breaking news. These are all unofficial. They're coming from members of my family, so I trust the source. I don't have all the details, but at least for the 19th, I'm told this includes Avon. Derek Slapp is leading Chris Barnes 62-52 to 52-38. That Beth Bai is, this may just be West Hartford results, I don't know. She is up 2-1 over Mark Merritt, essentially, and Andy Fleischman is up almost 2-1 over Levine for the 3 State House races. And not counting Mr. Varengia, who's unopposed, of course.
Okay, so you mentioned the other state rep seat that we have is the 18th. Andy Fleischman, he's the incumbent. He's been in that seat for a long time, probably since many of our viewers were children. And
I was asked to volunteer on Andy's first race while I was on a break home from college, and I never thought that I would have retired after being in office for what some would have said was maybe too long, and that I'm now here as an analyst for Andy's next re-election. It is kind of an amazing run.
Yeah, he's definitely got one of the longer tenures in the legislature. Yes. And he's running against Rob Levine. Rob Levine is also a newcomer, I think. I believe he's run for office before. And it seems like Andy Fleischman has the edge right now, unofficially, according to the Slifka clan.
And Andy has, I think we need to maybe point out for the viewers who may not know, that of the 2 of the 3 legislative seats in town, other than the state Senate seat, are just within West Hartford. So Joe Varengia's district and Andy's district are the 2 that have just West Hartford. I think Andy's is identified as perhaps the strongest in terms of Democratic legislation, and Joe's is also strong Democratic legislation, but less so than Andy's in the 18th. And of course, the multi-town district is the 19th, which always makes it more interesting.
Right. So the 19th has parts of West Hartford, Avon, I believe, and Farmington. Mm-hmm. Right. So that adds a little bit into the mix.
Correct.
So what have we been hearing on the campaign trail this cycle? What are voters' priorities? What are they talking about this year?
Well, I think what the candidates have been hearing is what they're hearing locally and nationally is really jobs. People are concerned about the economy. With respect to West Hartford in particular, I think there's a concern about the extent to which the state's financial trajectory is impacting home prices. There's concern about jobs in our community and what we're going to do about future generations. And really, there's this dichotomy now where people who have raised their families here don't have their children returning home. And it sounds overly dramatic, but it's really true. I think there's this concern that Connecticut's fiscal health is actually impacting the family's ability to stay together in Connecticut. People welcome back and have multiple generations. And that has been a theme that I've heard from Rob and Mark and Chris reported to. Hey, my son or daughter went to college and not coming home. We want them to come home. We want them to have jobs here, live there, and hopefully have grandkids here as well. So.
And what have you been hearing out on the campaign trail?
It's very similar to what Chris said. I don't know if I'd agreed with every conclusion, obviously, but yeah, there's the same issues that Chris and I heard a year ago while we were on the campaign trail for our own races. I think the challenge that Republicans face is that may be an argument that has some resonance statewide, is it doesn't feel as true in West Hartford, that if, maybe on the whole young people aren't returning to the state of Connecticut when they're done with school, but if they did come anywhere, they would come to West Hartford. So, or when their kids are visiting, they've been impressed with how well the town has done. So that makes it a much tougher case. But I think you can't also forget that, two things. One, I mentioned at the beginning, which is the personal connection that people in town have with these candidates. Now, Derek had a tougher role being a first-time candidate, as did all of the Republicans. But for Beth and for Andy and for Joe, these are people that they know really, really well, and they really like and think they're doing a good job. The second is, don't forget, it's a presidential year, and we have, I think, Chris and I would have died for the turnout that you see on a night like tonight. And you have, for all the people who are hyper concerned about West Hartford issues, you have many people who have registered who are really, frankly, interested in the presidential race, and then tend to vote one way or another based on their interest on the down ballot races, based on their interest in the presidential race. And I think that sometimes drowns out a lot of the discussion about the local issues.
Yeah, what do you think the impact of the presidential race has been during the local races?
Well, I mean, I can look here and tell you that Hillary Clinton had about 20,000 votes in West Hartford to Donald Trump 7,000. So obviously a lot of people came out who were Democrats, might have been here anyway, but many more and independents who came out to support Hillary Clinton tonight. And I'm gonna venture a guess that they did fill in a bubble for Democrats down the ballot as well.
So probably high turnout. Mm-hmm. What about the tone of the campaign?
In terms of its impact on the local elections?
Sure.
I don't, unfortunately, and I think this is something that Republicans have struggled with for years, because I don't think it's just limited to Donald Trump. I think during the Bush years, there was this tendency to really ascribe national policy to local Republicans. And in this instance in particular, I think that the tone of the national campaign came to a way to impact local candidates adversely. And it was unfortunately because it took the focus off, I think, what was at issue in these legislative races, which was really Hartford and the policies of Hartford. And so when you're talking about the national campaign and some of the things that were said and the tone that was used, it put a lot of people off, particularly in West Hartford, obviously by the numbers. I mean, I think that sort of ratio is inconsistent with even, I think, the town council in terms of Democrat versus the ours. So it says a lot about how West Hartford's residents reacted to the tone. And I do think that ultimately had an adverse effect on legislative candidates.
What would you predict the turnout to be in West Hartford, if you had to guess?
In terms of percentage?
Yeah.
Well, I was at Braeburn earlier. I knew it was about 62% at, was it 4 o'clock? So
with 4 hours to go.
I'd say, we're probably looking at 70% turnout. Maybe that's high.
I'm doing this like anybody else, but I think 70 to 75 seems like it's about right.
Yeah, I'm going to go even higher. I'm going to say West Hartford is going to have over 75% turnout.
Okay.
So we'll maybe bet a nickel or something on the turnout. What was your voting experience like? You vote at Braeburn. Where do you vote?
Sedgwick.
At Sedgwick. I vote at KP. How long were you in line today?
Maybe a minute, and that was at 8:15 a.m. And I'd gone on Twitter and saw it said that there were 500 people in line as of about 6:15. And my wife and I had made a plan school's out today, we were going to walk over with our daughter and vote at the same time. And the plan was based on kind of getting in and out quickly. And when I read that, I went, oh boy, we better prepare for something else. And there was a very short line. It was very full, but we got in and out quickly. And I give a lot of credit to S.E. LeBreau and our 2 registrars for running what appears to have been an incredibly smooth election today.
Yeah, I voted KP, and our whole voting process, from walking in the door to putting the ballot into the slot, was about 5 minutes. We had to wait in line behind one person. So I think we are going to see a high turnout, but I also saw on social media this morning lines at 6 a.m. were very long.
Yes.
By around 8, things had settled down. So I think a lot of people were very enthusiastic about voting today. Maybe they expected there to be long lines, and so they thought they'd get there early. You mentioned Twitter. I also was on Facebook looking at voter turnout. What else do you think that the impact of social media has been on this election?
Oh my gosh, that's almost like a treatise. Could go on and on.
We could.
The one thing
we only
that
have 40 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
What I would say is, social media and the impact. I think it's great. People are able to express themselves, and there's always, I think, a gross positive to people able to voice their opinions. Unfortunately, what I think has happened in this campaign, and I hope that whoever is elected come Wednesday morning, that we see each other as Americans, and I know that sounds corny, but what has happened is, whatever the issue is, whatever candidate you support, you're painted with this broad brush, one way or the other, and I think it's dysfunctional, and I think it's not a way to approach any issues productively. It's something we've avoided on the town council level. And so I hope that we can all look back on this experience, particularly the presidential election, and say, that's not us, wasn't good for the country, let's rise above moving forward. So the social media aspect, I don't think it has been great for our public discourse during this election cycle.
Do you know anyone that has unfriended somebody on social media because of politics this cycle?
I don't know that I know. Perhaps I've been unfriended. I don't know. I tend to stay away from public discourse. I don't know any specific examples. Certainly have heard of it.
How about you, Scott?
I don't. I dived back into it a little bit in the last few weeks here, just because it gets a little bit addicting. But as a general matter, I kind of stay off of it. And so not aware of any personal examples. But the couple of times I've stuck my toe into the water, I've seen enough, that kind of in line with what Chris said, that makes me not want to visit for too long. That it does. In one hand, it's great that there's a forum like that where people can share their views, and I think on the whole it probably does more good than bad, but you also see a lot of negative replies, and sometimes it's between friends, sometimes it's between a person and a stranger who happens just to be on their feed somehow, and it can get pretty ugly, and say, I don't know if this is really worth it. It's something I would just choose not to participate in. I kind of don't need the aggravation.
Do you feel that the parties locally and statewide and nationally have moved to social media to help promote their causes and sort of away from some of the traditional lawn signs? I think I've seen way fewer lawn signs this year. We've gotten fewer mail pieces this year. It seems like there's been more digital media out there for the candidates.
I think it's candidate by candidate. I think that you have individuals who've done really, really well with it. So I think somebody like Beth. Beth is year in and year out, all year round, I should say. She is active on social media. I think she uses it just for constituent contact, but also for getting her views out on things, and she's done a masterful job of it. I think for the campaigns themselves, it's not necessarily that easy to do to promote particular campaign issues. It's great because it's free, and if people are looking at it, it works, but I think there's also a lot of noise out there, and so try as they might, I think, to turn them into more of the vehicle for the campaign than the traditional things. I think it's hard to do. I don't know that I completely agree with the piece about mail. I know that the Democratic playbook typically is maybe have an intro piece somewhere earlier in the campaign, and then you kind of bombard them at the end, and that's exactly what I saw out of Derek in his race. I saw that out of Beth at the race, and you close very, very strong. Guessing I wasn't on the Republican mailing lists because I didn't get any of that. I did get a robocall from Mark Merritt yesterday, but if you have that kind of a disadvantage numerically, you can't, if you're a Republican, you can't ignore a Democrat and say, I'm not going to send anything to them at all, especially when you have the public financing. It's more of a struggle for Chris, for instance, running for the town council, because you got a limited amount of money. You only have so many places you can go, and you look at the choices you have and say, I'm going to mail to the Republicans, maybe the independents if I can afford it. when you have the state system where the candidates are equal, think you could contact all the same people that Beth could. They've just chosen to use their money in a less effective way. And then when you couple it with somebody who essentially is going year round to make sure she's in touch with her constituents like Beth has, it's very formidable to overcome.
I think that's a great point. And I think that on the Republican side this year, Mark, Rob, and Chris all relied heavily on mail. But I do think that, particularly Chris, and that's a campaign I'm most familiar with, I did the most work on that campaign, he really tried to gain support by hitting every single door. And he hit doors, to Scott's point, Democrat doors, independent doors, Republican doors. And I think from the Republican perspective, because we are outnumbered with respect to voter registration, our go-to in terms of our plans for our campaign is always the default being try to hit as many doors you can to meet and connect with people and hopefully be able to articulate and discuss your ideas. And that's been our playbook to try to overcome the number hill that we face every cycle.
All right, so I have some unofficial results here. And again, these are unofficial results from town. As you mentioned before, it looks like Hillary Clinton has about 74% of the vote here in town, and Donald Trump about 26%. Looks like we have about 27,000 voters in town, and that holds true across. It doesn't look like people dropped off their votes as they went down the ballot. Dick Blumenthal has about 73% to Dan Carter's 27%, and we'll go over the rest soon. Right now, actually, we're going to go over to Democratic headquarters where Beth Bai is speaking to those assembled, and this is at the American Legion.
And Kathy, and then my super volunteers, Nancy Allisberg. And then you mentioned about little Sophia, who did 3 6 a.m. lifts, that 3rd grader. She has been awesome. And we always try to involve children in campaigns when I run. And today there was a moment I was standing at Bristow, and it really brought tears to my eyes. Dallas Dodge was standing with me, and he was on the school board with me as a student rep, and I always told him, with that name, you're going to be senator. And then Peter Anders was there, who came to School for Young Children, is one of my preschoolers. Sophia was there, who comes to the farm now, and Kate was pole standing with me, who I had at School for Young Children on Asylum Hill. And I stood there looking at these young people thinking, we have to help them believe that government is a force of good in this world. We need a government that's functional, and we need young people to think campaigns are important. They're not dirty, they're important because they talk about our priorities. They talk about who we are as a people. And there's Dallas. And young people get involved when they're in high school, and now Dallas is representing us on the town council. We have to keep that positive spirit about our democracy going. There's so many people right now who want to get political gain by tearing us down, but this is the greatest country, one of the greatest states. It's definitely a great town that we live in here in West Hartford. So people work on campaigns. Those of you here who've been working on campaigns, do it because you know it matters.
You're here.
It matters. Slap is going to represent. Connecticut's great is going to represent us. That someone says, "Oh, Connecticut's circling the drain." That's not who we are. People of West Hartford and Farmington.
The state senate representing West Hartford, Burlington, Bloomfield, and Farmington. Scott, what do you think the mood is like at Democratic headquarters tonight? You've been there in the past.
Well, on a night like tonight, I think it's very jubilant for the folks who've won. But what's hanging over tonight, I think, is the presidential race. So I think you're going to see people be very happy right now and maybe have a beer or two. and then they're quickly going to go back and start watching something at home or go to one of the statewide parties to see that. I think it's a very different situation than, say, Chris and I would go through on a town council race, because that was it. That's the only race that night, and if you won, you could sit there and have a great time. If you lost, thankfully I never went through that, so I know what it was like, but it was great. But on a night like tonight, I know that I would, if I were Beth, I would be very quickly giving that speech and being very excited about that, and relishing the well-earned victory, and then immediately mentally moving on to and what's happening with Hillary Clinton.
Right, so while we still wait for national results on Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, we do still have some additional local races. It looks like Andy Fleischman is, again, these are unofficial tallies, is up 64% to 36%. And the 19th is pretty close. It looks like Derek Slapp has 54% to Chris Barnes's 45%. We're not sure yet if these tallies include all of the towns, so we're going to look into that before we confirm.
It's the dangerous to try to do off the top of the head math on these things, but if assuming our numbers are correct, I find it interesting that that it looks like Hillary Clinton's running well ahead of, say, Andy in this case, who's doing very, very well. But he's got a smaller pool and smaller part of town, so it's not necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison. But that would suggest to me that there are a lot of Republicans who may have defected, and they didn't vote for Andy, but they voted for Hillary Clinton. And I think, Chris, you know obviously better than I, but I think West Hartford went for Kasich in the primary and was very anti-Trump in that way. And so that wouldn't totally surprise me, I guess, to see it go that way.
Yeah, that's true. It's accurate. The West Hartford Republican vote primary went to Kasich, and I don't think it was an overly close race. I think Kasich was I think it was a three-way race, and he was in the 40s for West Hartford, something along those lines. So it did cut that way, and of course, you're right. The numbers do suggest that there are people who voting for Hillary at the top of the ticket may be making other choices down the line. And so, going back to your question earlier, what sort of impact it may have had down ballot? Well, it probably exacerbates whatever issue there is in rejection of the Republican presidential nominee.
Exactly. And what do you think the mood is like at Republican headquarters tonight? The Republicans are gathering at Butterfly.
Sure. So this is what I would say. I would say that, first of all, to Mark and Rob, and the numbers for Chris are still coming in. I believe Chris has a very good shot, so I hope that these numbers close. But to Mark and Rob, look, they're facing really institutions politically with respect to West Hartford. And despite that fact, they saw an issue that they thought they could help address in Hartford. And so they took time away from their family and friends to try to make things better and give it a chance. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, because politicians get a bad name in the public square, that people forget that when people are knocking on their doors, when the candidates are asking for their vote, it's time away from their kids, it's time away from their work. And so I would just say about these gentlemen, and even Representative Fleischman, I don't think has been challenged in 4, maybe 6 years. So Rob went out and challenged them despite that. But I would just say to both of them, they worked hard, they did their best, and I think even if you didn't end up voting for them, I think we should all appreciate the fact that there are those willing to step up, engage in public dialogue, because it's important. It's important to challenge incumbents, even if we like them, because there always has to be a public check on our policymakers to ensure that we have the best policies. And so when you're talking about what it's like there at headquarters, it's hard. When you run a hard race, you give it a lot of time, effort, and you don't end up having the outcome that you like. But I hope that they can all take some gratifying moments in the sense that they were able to step up, they answered the call in some respects, and they contributed. Even though they may not have won, they contributed to our public discourse, and it's important.
Well, I think it's important, too, for our viewers to understand that we do not have term limits here in Connecticut for any seat, whether it's legislative, the governor, state treasurer, any elected position in Connecticut. So people can stay in the state legislature for a very long time. And as you mentioned, it does become difficult to topple an incumbent. Scott, you were mentioning earlier, you think that one of the legislative Democrats who's been around a long time probably did lose her seat tonight, and that's Betty Bocas out in
according to
Plainville.
the news here, yes.
So it can happen. She was beat by somebody who was very well known, Dr. Pettit. But I think we will probably see, usually every election cycle, we see a couple of long-term incumbents who do lose their seat. It does happen once in a while. As far as the state Senate and the state House go, do you have any predictions as far as whether the Democrats will retain the majority or maybe the Republicans will pick up enough seats?
I do, and I think it's more just the math than me being on here as the so-called partisan. It's simply that, as we said with the local races, and these extend statewide, that overshadowing this is an incredibly passionate presidential race, and that perhaps in isolation the argument that was put forward by the Republican Party might have been carried more weight, but I think it's largely drowned out by the combination of the Democratic interest in the presidential race, the independents and Republicans who may have defected as a result of Trump being at the top of the ticket. And then at the local level, again, it's not just West Hartford, though we're blessed with very, very good representatives, that in every community you have people who say, I might hate Hartford, but I really like my local representative or senator.
So let's hear from one of them right now. We're going to kick it back to Democratic headquarters, where Representative Andy Fleischman is speaking to the crowd.
With support from a Democratic executive branch. So for people who say, well, what does government matter? There's an answer for that family. It matters profoundly. I spoke to someone else who said to me, I'm for you, I'll always be for you. I said, thank you, why is that? And he said, well, you may not recall, but several years ago my wife was having trouble getting her retirement benefit, and I called your office, and you made sure that she got the benefit that she had worked for the past 35 years. Now, I have to admit, we have so many constituent cases that come in, I didn't remember offhand that specific case. But I tell my staff and my interns, our job is to help people. It's that simple. That's why we're in government, to help people. And so my office, my staff, and me, we figured out a way to make sure this person got the benefit that she had earned over 35 years. That's what we stand for as Democrats, right? To make sure people get what they deserve and that we're fair to everyone. So I think that the great results that you see up here tonight for all the Democrats, most notably for our new soon-to-be colleague, Derek These results reflect the fact that the people of West Hartford share our view that whether you're campaigning or you're in office, your job is to help others, and when you help others, that matters. So I'm just thrilled. Let me mention just a couple of closing notes. One about Derek. So I don't know if you guys who are outside the 19th district have a sense of how hard he worked. I think I can say this young man. How hard this young man worked from the day that he agreed to be the flag bearer for our team in the 19th Central District. The only person in this town who I've ever seen work at a similar level for a similar amount of time is his predecessor, Brian Becker, who I believe is here tonight. Brian, are you still here? You might have gotten here. Let's give a hand for Brian. Brian set a high bar, and he kind of informed Derek, okay, so here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to knock at least, 4,000 doors. You're going to have to, 5,000, 6,000. Anyhow, he scared the heck out of Derek with telling him what he had to do in terms of door knocking, phone calling, dropping lit, organizing a good campaign team, and executing. And Derek did it all. And Derek didn't just do it for himself, he did it as a team player. I heard him on the phones, and he was always calling for himself, and then for Beth, and then for the top of the ticket too. So let's give a big hand to a new member of the team. Finally, I'll just wrap up by saying I was a few minutes late here tonight because I was trying to make sure one of my girls finished doing her homework, the other brushed her teeth, which she somehow doesn't think is a necessary thing to do before going to bed. And and my wife, of course, was making sure that everything happened afterwards. All of you who've served, all of you who've worked in these campaigns know you can't do it without the support of your family. I told my wife, please do not come tonight. I know you have other things to do, but I am so grateful for their support. And really, as Beth pointed out, with kids who are now grown up, we do it for these kids, right? We're getting a great education here in our town of West Hartford, and we're going to do great things in our state of Connecticut, which will continue to be the leader in patents, in innovation, and productivity. So great job, West Hartford Democrats. I'm proud to be one of And I am now going to pass the baton to a great colleague who had a big win tonight. I believe he hit 100%. My friend Joe Reggio.
And you think it's easy running unopposed?
Class of '82.
You know, yes, you're right. I was on my way over in the car with my wife Maria, and I said, geez, Maria, I'm not sure what I'm going to say. I don't have any catchphrases like, you know, it was a hard-fought campaign or won it in the 11th hour. So I decided I'm going to keep it very simple and simply start off by thanking a few people. First, my wife Maria for all her help and support during the campaign and throughout the election. And my treasurer, Tina Kumar, who did a great job as my treasurer, and she is down in Westport working on getting some Democrats down there elected as well. But really, tonight's all about the people who made us successful, all the candidates, and that's the people who are in this room. Just about everyone in this room, in some way or another, contributed to our success. So as much as it's nice standing in front of the room and being the elected official, that's great, but really, you are the foundation to our success. So I really want to thank everyone who was involved in all the campaigns. And again, give yourselves a hand. I said this probably during the last election, and I mean it sincerely, and I believe it's worth repeating. I remember, and Derek will find this out as well, when I first got elected and I went to the Capitol, I was really taken back by how well received and how well respected the West Hartford delegation is at the Capitol. And that speaks to all the people who have served, Senator Sullivan, Jonathan Harris, and others, who really set the foundation for West Hartford. And I believe that that's why we are in the leadership roles at the Capitol, very important roles at the Capitol, having Senator Beth Bai in charge of appropriations, Andy in charge of education, and now that I've had some time taking leadership roles as well. And that's very important to not only bring funds and things back to the town, but really setting the policy going forward for the state of Connecticut. But I don't believe that this evening is the time to talk about setting the policy going forward, because this is like a Super Bowl celebration. Although I've never been involved in a Super Bowl or won a Super Bowl, this is probably the closest thing I'll get to winning a Super Bowl, winning an election. But oftentimes after a Super Bowl, they'll ask the coach, well, what about next year? Well, we'll worry about next year starting tomorrow. Tonight it's about just savoring our victories, recognizing our success, our hard work, and celebrating it all. So for that, I just want to say thank you. I want to welcome Derek as part of the team. I look forward to working with you, and congratulations on your hard part. This moment through July and June and all.
Positive about the 19th district with Derek Slapp and Chris Barnes, but we're pretty sure that Derek Slapp has been able to keep that seat in the Democratic line. Are you hearing anything, Chris, different than that?
I'm not hearing anything different from that at this point. I would just say to my good friend Chris Barnes that he ran a hell of a race. He's a great guy, and I don't know Derek personally. I'm sure he's a gentleman. I just feel as though the people lost out on an opportunity with Chris, and I say that as his friend.
So how do we encourage people to stay involved in politics and public policy? This election really has encouraged a lot of people to start paying attention. And now that the election is over, it would be great if people could figure out how they can channel that enthusiasm and that interest into continuing to participate in civic life. You're on town council. Do you hear from people about town issues, or is it mostly radio silence?
I hear a lot from people, and I think that's important. That's a good thing. It's our job to respond to the residents' concern. But in terms of keeping people engaged and encouraging good people to run, I think there's two things. Number one, I think the public needs to keep their representatives accountable for the choices they make and the decisions that they make. But I think that in doing that, they need to hear why the representatives make certain decisions. I think too often there's a rush to judgment about questionable motivations, and that discourages people from running, because we're all human beings, we all have family and friends, and I think most of us try to do the right thing. And unless we can have a productive dialogue that focuses on substance as opposed to motivations, we're not going to be encouraging good people to run. And then secondarily, I think that with respect to encouraging people to run, sorry, I thought we were getting an update there. I think that lost my train of thought. But
so getting more people to run. So actually next year we have a town council
Yeah.
race. There may or may not be available slots on the ballot if people want to run for town council. It's a good way to get your feet wet in the political process.
yeah, and
That's how you got involved. in it, right?
absolutely, and it's an honor to serve. I'm very proud of the fact that I serve. You know, I grew up in town. I know Mr. Mayor. I can't help it. I served for many, many years, and I think it's important and it's a good thing. And there's honor in service to your community. I do it because I want my kids to see it. I know the mayor has said the same thing about his daughter. But I think that we all who are elected officials, the more we focus on substance, the more we're going to encourage good people to run. We do that on the local level. They should do it on the state level, and they surely should do it on the federal level. And I think if we did that, things would be much better, and more people would run and be encouraged to be part of the process.
Yeah, do you have any tips for getting citizens to remain involved in the process now that the election is just about over?
I actually might take a slightly less gloomy view of it, and maybe it's easier for me because I'm on the winning side, at least for that this part of the discussion today. But I think West Hartford is actually a place where everybody's very involved, and maybe not every seat has been contested every single time, or do you always get a full complement of candidates for the local races? But one school of thought for that has been that people are really involved, and they were pretty pleased with the leadership that they had received, and so they do the calculus that Chris said, and it's like, well, if I'm more or less happy with how things are, and I don't think I would win anyway if I was challenging, why am I going to take all the time away from my family? But I think in a place like West Hartford, we don't really have that problem. It may exist elsewhere, but here we're kind of blessed to have people, a community, not just elected officials, but a whole community that is engaged. But I think you get, in my experience, a place that you get a lot of recruits to office is not by having to go find people individually and talk them into running. They sort of come naturally from like the PTAs, for instance. You get a lot of candidates, if you look at them over the years, they started as organically just getting involved in something at their kid's school. And they were never intending to get involved in this kind of level of politics, but they were good at it and people liked them, and they get really invested in local issues, and all of a sudden somebody like me turns around and says, hey, that school board president might be a great person to have on our ticket someday. And there's other organizations throughout town that fill that kind of void, and we're lucky to have those. And I think you'll see, if you're looking for the next generation of people, I think that's the kind of place you would look.
Speaking of generations, there's been a lot made of the aging demographic here in Connecticut. Here in West Hartford, we're seeing a shift towards an older population, but more millennials are having the opportunity to vote for the first time. What are the differences that you're finding in the generations, millennials, Gen Xers, the baby boomers, and even the folks older than that? You noticing any differences in their political persuasions or ideology?
Sure. Traditionally, I think the old logic is that the younger members of the community care less about the property tax burdens that they may face because they have kids in schools, and those who are perhaps in the older age groups, they care a little bit more because they don't have the kids in the schools anymore. I'm not so sure that it applies in West Hartford, because I think West Hartford, there's an understanding among its residents about the quality of schools, and I think the impact of taxes is less of a concern to the residents here in town. And I think when we get to a larger picture of Connecticut, I do think that there is a massive demographic shift. I mean, there's just not a lot of young people settling in West Hartford. And the implications that has for our economic future as well as our political future, I think will play out down the road, but it's certainly an issue. I think on the local level, and the town council, it's funny, when I was elected, I was very proud of the fact that I was the youngest member of the town council, and I'm the only person to ever serve with Mayor Slifka, who was his junior. So I was always very proud of that. But, you know, about 5 minutes later, when the mayor stepped down, they appointed Dallas Dodge, who's younger than me, so that was short-lived. But anyways, on the town council, we do have some younger representation, which I think is good for the community to add a little different perspective.
Yeah, are you noticing a shift in who's registering as Democrats versus Republican, unaffiliated, based on generation?
I can't pretend to quote any current registration numbers, and I think they're always a bit skewed. When you're asking for who's going to get involved in town, I think the registration numbers you get for a federal election are a bit skewed because we tend to lose at least a third of those, I think, for the municipal vote the next time around. They're not necessarily reliable voters, and are those the people that may not really get involved in town. But I actually thought we didn't have a problem in recruiting people who were younger, and I didn't necessarily, I think the advantage in town has been more and more blue in the time that I served. In fact, the first time I ran, we ran against Republican supermajorities on both the school board and the town council. So I remember a bit of a different time. But I think one of the things we actually were trying to do over time was find people on the other end of the spectrum to bring in the perspective of the person who's more concerned about the property tax, as Chris was saying, and get the perspective of a senior, perhaps, and try to get more of them to be on the ticket as opposed to being sort of overloaded with people who were of the younger demographic and really had that profile of, I'm really here for the education for my kids, and not be over-indexed on that, and make sure we were representing the community as a whole, and people who were saying, yeah, I love the education system, I spent a lot on it while my kids were in it, but now I'm in a little bit of different perspective, and I'd like to bring that to the town government.
So we've had a surge in voter registration over the last 3 or 4 months. We know in Connecticut today, this was the first presidential election where we had same-day voter registration. As of 5 o'clock, I think 20,000 Connecticut residents had registered to vote just today alone, and so I'm sure that number is even higher now that the polls have closed. And now the challenge will be to try to prevent that drop-off next time we have an election, which will be for town council. What are some of the issues that town council elections face that are different than state legislative races?
Well, I think that the issues that come before the town council, you see more directly in your day-to-day life than you would on those, with respect to those issues that are dealt with on the federal level, certainly, and then less so with respect to Hartford. And so that's what I would say, because it's your schools, it's your roads, it's your playgrounds and parks, it's your everyday life, and it's your pocketbook. I mean, your property taxes, that's a major has major financial implications for any family budget in town. So I would say that on the local level, it's more of a day-to-day impact than I think most people realize.
So we've got town council, also Board of Ed next year. There'll be some open seats on that. So people really should stay involved. They can go on the town website and look at meeting agendas for the town council and Board of Ed. All the meetings are open to the public. Right?
They're live on Channel 5.
And live on WHC TV, Channel 5, or streaming live. And available on demand.
Don't want to interrupt the civics recruitment.
Sorry
That's
about that.
We do want to do that, but I did get a note here that Chris Barnes has called Derek Slapp to concede, so I guess we do have our answer at this point in that race.
Okay, thanks for letting us know about that.
Here to break news.
Do you have any other breaking news for us?
It looks like the presidential race is awfully tight. So, when I said earlier that the people at the Democratic headquarters would be feeling very good for a few minutes and then would be panicking to go back to some other locale to watch TV all night, I think that's going to be the case.
That sounds about right.
And perhaps for those that add to that, those that are in the legislature are probably watching the results to see if are they going to maintain a majority or what size is it going to be.
Right, so there have been some predictions that the Republicans could take the state Senate, which is currently 21 Democrats and 15 Republicans. We know one seat has already switched, which is the 18th district down in southeastern Connecticut, has switched from Democrat to Republican. We haven't heard yet about some of the other hot races in the state Senate. The state House was a little bit of a bigger lift for the Republicans to grab the majority. I think it's 87 to 64 advantage for the Democrats there, but we are already seeing some of those seats flip over to Republican as well. So a lot more to learn tonight about the state legislative races outside of West Hartford. Here we know what's gone on with the state legislative races. I neglected to mention Congressman Larson, of course. Congressman Larson was reelected with a wide margin, looks like a 70 to 29% margin there, and we'll wait to see what happens with Congress. And
well, all of the federal races in Connecticut have been called at this point, so we know what that result is, and now we have something coming in.
All right, thank you. We are going to go over to the town Republicans, and they are at.
I think that we have not had a team that went out and ran the way these three guys did in years. And I hope that you guys all realize that. So I just want you to please give a round of applause and a cheer. Everybody should raise their glass to these three guys. The numbers are not the way we wanted them to be, and it is a tough town. But I can't believe the job they've done. I mean, it started back in the spring, and once they got nominated, they went out and they hit the road. And the only way you can change minds is face to face. Rob started right away. 4,000 houses. Chris Barnes, 5,000. Yes. Mark Merritt, how many houses? 4,000, right? Yes. It's amazing. And I just want to thank them for doing a great job. But I will say one thing. The numbers may not look the way we want them to be. And the Republican Party in West Hartford, we may not win. We're not down, and then we're not buried. We're going to come back, and we're going to win. Because I hate losing more than anything in the world. And I want to thank, like, not even them, their families. You know, every time I had a conversation with Mark and Rob and Chris, I said, is your family into this? I said, seriously, because I know that when I ran, you know, just, when I'm the chairman of the party, and you lose a race, like I did, and then you become chairman. Peter Martin lost the race, he became chairman, so.
I don't want to be chairman.
I don't want to be chairman. And I'm not giving it up yet. I'm not going in. But I remember my conversation with my wife about the whole thing, and I said, and she's like, really? I'm like, yeah. So, thank you to your family, guys, you did a great job. Thank you.
Yes.
And we're back in the studio. I want to thank you for joining us tonight for WHC TV's Election Night Live special. I want to thank the entire crew that is working behind the scenes to bring in the results and bring us out to the Democratic and Republican headquarters. And thank you for participating in this process and watching us tonight. Thanks to Chris and Scott for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Please do stay involved in the political process, whether it's on the state, national, or local level. Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night.